Hey everyone, AMD reported quarterly earnings results, and that has a lot of investors curious about AMD stock. I'll review those earnings results, and I'll also update my recommendation of AMD. Coming into the quarter, I had AMD rated as one of my top 25 stocks to buy in 2024. You're going to want to tune in to see if I'm changing that recommendation. So let's take a look at the numbers. I want to thank the Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. Visit fool.com/Parkev for the 10 best stocks to buy now. All right, like I highlighted, I've had AMD stock rated as one of my top 25 stocks to buy, and you're going to want to tune in to see if I'm changing this recommendation today after the company's earnings. AMD management saying that they delivered a strong first quarter with their data center and client segments, each growing more than 80% year over year, driven by the ramp of their MI300 AI accelerator shipments and the adoption of their Ryzen and EPYC processors. The CEO goes on to say this is an incredibly exciting time for the industry as widespread deployment of AI is driving demand for significantly more compute across a broad range of markets. So that's great news to be sure. I was looking for growth in this segment, especially driven by the MI300 accelerator. I wanted to see how this performed in relation to how NVIDIA is performing, given the strong demand for NVIDIA's GPUs. Wanted to see AMD make some inroads in market share in this segment, and it looks like they did that. They did deliver some growth in that segment, and that's what investors are looking for. Doesn't have to be all at once. It can be incremental growth in the segment. Moving on, AMD reported its first quarter revenue up 2% year over year. So even though those segments I highlighted earlier grew more than 80%, the company had segments that were in huge declines, which I'll share with you in a little bit, that brought down the revenue growth. Now, overall gross margin also increased to 47%, up from 44%. And that was a nice incremental increase for AMD. Operating income jumped to $36 million, up from a negative $145 million. So making progress on that front as well. Now let's get a breakdown of segment level revenue. As I highlighted already, data center segment was up by over 80% to $2.3 billion. This is where the company houses its AI GPUs and CPUs, and that is the AMD Instinct GPUs and the Gen AMD EPYC CPUs. Revenue in this segment was up nicely. Client segment revenue was also up over 85%, driven by the AMD Ryzen 8000 series processor sales. But that's the extent of the good news. The gaming segment revenue of $922 million was down 48% year over year, and the embedded segment revenue of $846 million was down 46% year over year. So the company has two strong segments and two weaker segments. The stronger segments offset the declines in the weaker segments, leading to overall growth in the business, but still they have some weaker segments pulling back overall revenue growth at AMD. For the second quarter, AMD is expecting revenue of approximately $5.7 billion. And at the midpoint of that range, it would represent revenue growth of approximately 6%. So that would be larger growth than the current quarter. So accelerating revenue growth, which I really like to see from companies I'm considering investing in, is accelerating revenue growth. Also, AMD expects the gross profit margin to continue rising up to 53%, up from the 47%. So improvement in revenue leading to improvement in profit margin. Excellent. That's what I like to see as well. Another critical metric I look at is cash flow from operations. And for AMD, it increased to $521 million in cash flow from operations, up from $486 million in the same quarter in 2023. So AMD making improvements, demonstrating growth as a result of rising demand from artificial intelligence. The segment that houses its AI business is growing rapidly, but it has other segments in the business weighing it down. Still, I was happy to see AMD's GPU gaining traction and accelerating revenue growth from AMD in the current quarter. So overall, solid quarter from AMD. I would say as expected, not much better than expected. The revenue growth for the next quarter, about in line with expectations. I want to hear more from management during the quarterly conference call, which I will be covering for everyone in subsequent videos following this one. But for an initial look and the update on revenue, profitability, cash flow from operations, demand from the MI300X GPU growing as I was hoping it would grow, solid growth from AMD. I was happy to see this. This is enough for me to reiterate my buy recommendation, my top 25 recommendation for AMD stock. I'm keeping it here on this list of top 25 stocks to buy, reiterating that recommendation. Now, AMD still has those two business segments that will continue to struggle throughout 2024, but that segment of the business can achieve back to growth towards the end of this year, perhaps in 2025. One of the areas AMD struggles with is the impact of all of the computers that were bought in 2020 and 2021. The consumer refresh cycle is only getting underway here in 2024. It's going to gain momentum in mid-2024, late 2024, and then especially in 2025 and 2026, when all of those devices that were purchased in those earlier years of the pandemic will need to be replaced, and AMD stands to benefit from that trend as well. Overall, AMD has tailwinds and headwinds in 2024. Unlike NVIDIA, which is primarily tailwinds, right? Everything is going well for NVIDIA. Hard to keep up with NVIDIA. AMD is at least one, arguably two steps behind NVIDIA in the GPU for AIs, but it's coming into the market. And then if you compare with Intel in the CPU market, Intel is also struggling, right? So they've also hinted that their refresh, the replacement cycle in personal computers in 2024 is starting off a little bit slower than expected. A little bit slower than expected is what we're hearing about the refresh cycle in personal computers in 2024. But we're also hearing that these newer computers that are infused with artificial intelligence capabilities are drawing significant interest from investors, and that could lead to a broadening of this refresh cycle later on in 2024. Overall, I still think AMD is an excellent stock at current valuations, so I'm keeping it here as a top 25 stock to buy. Before I let you go, let me tell you about the greatest deal on YouTube. With just a click of a button, you can get free financial analysis from a professor with decades of investing experience. So what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you again soon.